Imagine you wake up tomorrow and your job is gone. Money doesn't exist. Your boss doesn't exist. No alarm, no email, no meetings, and no such thing as a Monday. What do you do? If your first thought is, finally, I'm free, that's the exact thought almost every human had for 300,000 years. And in some ways, they were living better than you are right now. So, what did ancient humans actually do all day, from sunrise to sunset? The answer is stranger and a little embarrassing than you'd think. The biggest lie you were ever told about the ancient world is that survival back then was a full-time job. You've seen the cartoon version. Someone wakes up in a cave, tries not to get eaten, grunts at a rock, fails to invent farming, and dies young. It's a great story. It's also almost completely wrong. We believed it for a long time because we dug up the hard evidence first. We found bones with cut marks. We found spears. We found the leftovers of hunted animals, and we decided the whole thing was one long, brutal fight to stay alive. But then we kept digging. We found flutes carved from bird bone and mammoth ivory. We found necklaces made from shells and pierced teeth. We found paintings deep inside caves. We found graves where people with lifelong injuries had been buried gently, sometimes with flowers. That is not how a species behaves. When every second is a panic, that is how a species behaves. When it has time on its hands, and a lot of it. In the 1960s, an anthropologist named Marshall Sahlins actually measured this. He studied groups still living, as hunters and gatherers, tracking how they really spent their hours. And the numbers broke the myth in half. On average, these groups spent somewhere between 3 and 5 hours a day on the work of staying alive, finding food, preparing it, fixing tools, keeping shelter standing. 3 to 5 hours. The rest of the day was genuinely, honestly free. Sahlins called them the original affluent society. Not because they owned a lot. They owned almost nothing. On purpose. Because everything you own is something you have to carry. They were rich in the one thing you are probably chasing right now and almost never catch: time. Open, unscheduled, unsold time. Now compare that to you. Between your job, your commute, your inbox, your errands, and the endless background noise of keeping a modern life running, you get only a handful of truly free hours on a good day, if you are lucky. And a big share of even that gets spent staring at a screen, built to keep you anxious enough to keep scrolling. Sit with that for a second. You are working longer, resting less, and feeling more stretched thin than people who hunted their dinner with sharpened sticks. You are not broken, and you are not lazy. You are running ancient hardware in a world it was never built for. So if they weren't fighting for their lives all day, what were they actually doing with all that time? Start with the thing they did more than anything else. The first thing you'd notice, if you could sit beside that evening fire, wouldn't be the flames, or the animal skins, or the missing Wi-Fi. It would be the talking. Ancient humans were relentless, gifted, tireless talkers. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups keep finding the same thing. A huge share of their social time, by some estimates well over half, went into conversation. And it wasn't all practical. It wasn't just where the herd is moving, or which way the river runs. They gossiped, they told jokes, they argued and flirted, and complained about each other. They told stories about things that happened years ago, and guessed at things they couldn't explain. They passed down who did what, who could be trusted, and who owed whom a favor. In a world with no writing, that talk was the only record they had, a living library kept alive out loud. Sound familiar? Robin Dunbar, a British anthropologist, thinks this is the whole reason you can speak at all. Other primates hold their groups together by grooming each other, picking through fur by hand. It builds trust, but it's slow, and it only works one friend at a time. As human groups got bigger, there simply weren't enough hours in the day to groom everyone by hand. So we evolved a shortcut. Language. You can groom a whole group with your voice at once. Sitting by a fire Talking and laughing with 5 people, you keep up 5 friendships in the time it used to take to keep up one. It was efficient, it was warm, and it quietly built the trust that held the whole group together through hard seasons, which means gossip is not a character flaw. It's the original social technology, the first software human community ever ran. So every time you call a friend just to talk about nothing, or trade stories with a coworker about something silly, or spend a whole evening just laughing with people you love, you are not wasting time. You are doing the single oldest, most human thing there is. You're just doing it with better lighting. But when the talking finally wound down and the fire burned low, they did something with the night that would probably surprise you. When the talking stopped and the fire burned low, they slept. But not in the single, solid, 8-hour block you've been told is normal. That block may be one of the most modern things about you. A historian named Roger E. Kirch spent more than 20 years reading old diaries, medical books, court records, and letters. And he kept running into the same strange detail. Before artificial light was everywhere, most people didn't sleep once. They slept twice. There was a first sleep from about dusk until somewhere around midnight. Then a stretch of being awake, calmly, naturally awake for an hour or two. Then a second sleep until dawn. And that middle of the night gap wasn't a problem to fix. Nobody was lying there furious, begging their brain to shut off. People got up. They talked quietly with family. They prayed. They thought. They had sex. They checked on the animals. They visited a neighbor. Some used that quiet hour for their clearest thinking, the kind the busy daylight never allowed. Old texts mention first sleep and second sleep so casually that nobody bothered to explain them. Everyone just knew. Doctors of the time even had advice for what to do in that waking hour, treating it as the most natural thing in the world. It was simply part of the night as ordinary to them, as checking your phone in the morning is to you. It was only when gaslight and then electric light conquered the night that this natural rhythm got squeezed and flattened into one long block we now call normal. So here's the part. That might change how you feel about your own body. If you sometimes wake at 2 a.m, lie there, feeling oddly calm and clear, and wonder what is wrong with you, the honest answer might be nothing at all. Your body is running a program. It ran for hundreds of thousands of years. You're just missing the fire, the low voices nearby, and a darkness so complete you can barely imagine it. And with the sun up and their few hours of real work behind them, they turned to something you've been trained to feel a little guilty about. Once the day's real work was done, and there wasn't much of it, they did something you've been trained to feel guilty about. They played, and they took it seriously. Play isn't a modern luxury. You earn after the important things are done. It's one of the clearest signs of an intelligent social animal. Crows play, dolphins play, wolves play, and you, who are all of those things and more, play constantly, whether you admit it or not. Every game on your phone, every sport you shout at on a screen, every playful argument with a friend is the same ancient drive dressed in modern clothes. We found board games, reaching back to the earliest cities. One of them, the Royal Game of Ur, is old enough that we had to rebuild its rules from a clay tablet, but organized play is far older than any city. In every hunter-gatherer group ever studied, children play richly and endlessly. They copy adult skills, invent their own rules, compete, team up, and negotiate. That pattern shows up in every human culture we've ever seen, on every continent, in groups that never met. Foot races, wrestling matches, contests of aim and skill, all appearing on their own again and again. When a behavior is that universal, it's usually written deep into who we are. And here's the quiet genius of it. For ancient children, there was no line between playing and learning. You learned to hunt by playing at hunting. You learned to read people by playing games. with real stakes and real arguments. You learn to lose and to keep going. They weren't sent to a classroom. The whole world was the classroom, and play was the lesson. So, the next time you feel guilty for playing a game or messing around for no reason, remember you're running very old software. That pull toward play is not a distraction from being human. It is one of the oldest, truest signs of it. But play was only the beginning of what those free hours produced. Because those same hands were making things that still leave experts speechless today. Everything you picture when you hear Stone Age, crude, rough, simple, is wrong. The tools, the clothing, the art, all of it took years of skill to master. Start with shaping stone, the craft of striking flint or obsidian in exactly the right places. To produce a blade with a clean, sharp edge sounds like something anyone could do. With a rock, it is not. The stone breaks along hidden lines. You have to read in advance. The angle, the force, and the spot of every strike has to be controlled. One wrong hit, and the whole piece shatters. People who try to learn this today report that real skill takes years of steady practice. Ancient humans spent a serious slice of their lives getting good at it. Then think about clothing. In a cold climate, which was an enormous project, animal hides had to be scraped clean, treated so they wouldn't rot, or go stiff, and stitched into garments. Using needles carved from bone. We found bone needles. 50,000 years old, needles with a tiny eye that someone drilled by hand with stone tools because they wanted to sew and because the quality of the stitching actually mattered to them. And then there's the art, which should stop you cold. The cave paintings at Lascaux in France are around 17,000 years old. The ones at Chauvet may be closer to 36,000. These are not scribbles. They are confident, dynamic, carefully composed. Horses mid-gallop, bison turning their heads, charging rhinos, and lions hunting in a pack. The artists understood movement, depth, light, and shadow in a way that still astonishes. Professionals who study them, some of them used the natural bulges and curves of the cave wall, so that by flickering firelight, the only light they had, the animals seemed to breathe and shift and move. They built a moving picture into solid rock in the dark tens of thousands of years ago. That is not primitive. That is breathtaking. And it means someone lay on the cold floor of a cave for hours doing this. Not because it fed anyone, but because they had something to say and needed a way to say it. That's the same itch that drives every song, every film, every drawing, every post you make today. The need to make something and be seen. But if you think the art was their most impressive achievement, wait until you see how they hunted. The most unbelievable thing ancient humans did all day. Sounds, at first, like a joke. They ran animals to death. Before the bow and arrow, which shows up around 70,000 years ago, in southern Africa, and much later elsewhere, people hunted with spears, and with a strategy called persistence hunting. And it is exactly what it sounds like. You pick out a large animal, a deer, an antelope, and then you follow it. You don't sprint. You can't outrun it in a sprint, and you don't try. You just keep pace. You track it, and you jog after it through the hottest part of the day. Every time it stops to rest, because most four-legged animals cool themselves by panting, and panting means standing still. You appear again on the horizon. It panics, it runs, and you follow for 5 hours, for 8 hours, sometimes longer, until the animal is so overheated, so completely drained, that it simply collapses and cannot get back up. And you walk up to it calmly and finish the hunt. This works because you sweat. You are one of the very few animals on the planet that cools itself mainly through sweat, instead of panting, which means you can keep moving, in heat that shuts almost everything else down. Look at your own body. It's a little strange. Nearly hairless, sweaty, flat-footed, with a surprisingly large backside. All of that was shaped by evolution for long-distance running in the heat. That big muscle in your rear is huge compared to other primates, not because you sit on it, but because you run. Your long legs, your flat feet, the way your head stays steady. Instead of bobbing when you move, the fact that you can breathe, out of step with your stride, while most four-legged animals cannot, all of it running gear. You were built, bone by bone, to be one of the most patient and terrifying endurance hunters that ever lived. So the next time you run a half marathon and start questioning your life choices, somewhere around mile 9, remember this. You are using equipment engineered over millions of years to chase down animals across open ground, under a blazing sun. You were made for this, right down to the sweat on your skin. Your ancestors were frighteningly good at it. But here's what might surprise you most. The same body that could run down an antelope was just as good at the exact opposite. And that is the strange part. Ancient humans were masters of something you can barely manage anymore. Sitting still and doing nothing at all. And they were almost certainly far better at genuine rest than you are. Not just sleeping more, but actually resting the mind in a way most modern people have quietly lost. Your brain has a setting neuroscientists call the default mode network. It switches on when you are not focused on any task, when your attention drifts inward. It's tied to daydreaming, self-reflection, creative thinking, working through your feelings, and quietly rehearsing the past and the future. It matters enormously for your mental health and your creativity. And here's the catch. It only turns on properly when your mind is truly at rest, when it finally stops taking in new input. But you fill every gap. A podcast in the shower, a scroll while you wait, something to watch, something to read, a notification to check. We have accidentally built a world where genuine mental rest is almost impossible to reach by accident. You have to fight for it. Ancient humans never had that problem. Sitting by a fire after dark, watching the flames, not doing anything in particular, letting thoughts rise and drift away. That was just an ordinary evening. For most of human history, it was the default, and it probably did. Quiet, powerful things to them. A calmer mood, steadier emotions, and that strange, unforced problem solving your brain does. The moment you stop trying, think about how often the big leaps in art, in philosophy, in science seem to come from stillness rather than hurry. Those long, empty evenings weren't wasted. They were where the questions came from. Why do the stars move? Where do the dead go? How did any of this begin? The stories they told around the fire, trying to answer, are the ancestors of science, of religion, of philosophy itself. They came from minds with enough time to wander. But the most human thing they did with all that time wasn't thinking, or hunting, or making art. It was this. If you really want to know who these people were, don't look at their tools. Look at how they treated the ones who could not survive on their own. Because this is the part that hits the hardest, and it's the part the caveman cartoons always leave out. We have found the skeletons of people who lived for years, even decades, with severe, lifelong conditions. People who, by any cold logic of survival, could not have pulled their own weight, and they lived anyway, because someone chose to keep them alive. In a place called Shanidar Cave, in what is now Iraq, we found a Neanderthal who had a withered, amputated arm, was likely blind in one eye, had lost much of his hearing, and had survived serious injuries to his legs. He was around 40 years old when he died, which back then was genuinely old. He could not have hunted. He could not have gathered much of anything. By pure survival math, he was a burden. And his group fed him, protected him, and kept him alive for years anyway. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. We found the skull of a child with Down syndrome who lived in what is now Spain and reached about 8 years of age. Keeping a child like that alive and cared for in that world for that long goes far beyond simple instinct. Someone loved that child enough to make it happen. We have found broken bones that healed, which means the injured person was fed and protected for weeks or months. While they couldn't move, someone sat with them, someone brought them food, and kept the fire going day after day until they could stand on their own again. And when people died, ancient humans buried them with care, with arrangement, with small gifts placed beside the body, with something that looks unmistakably like ceremony. They mourned, they remembered, they treated the end of a life as something that mattered. So the bones don't tell a story of cold, everyone out for themselves survival. They tell a story of people who spent real effort, real food, and real time on each other for no strategic reason at all, except that caring for your people is the most human thing there is. You feel that same pull every time you sit with a sick friend or carry someone who cannot carry themselves or show up for a person who can never pay you back. That impulse is older than farming, older than cities, older than history itself. So, what did ancient humans do all day? With no jobs, no bosses, and no Mondays? They talked for hours. They slept in two soft halves of the night. They played and made art and ran down the impossible and sat quietly with their own thoughts and took tender care of each other. They didn't own much, but they had time and closeness and stillness, the exact three things. You spend most of your life trying to win back. You're not broken. You're just a little homesick for a fire you've never seen. So here's my one honest question for you. If you could, would you go back? Tell me in the comments. I read them by firelight. And until next time, take care of yourselves and maybe log off a little early tonight